Tonight we have the opportunity to hear three individuals for another panel that will lead us into our discussion on inclusivity. First, to my left here is Sharon Aylsworth. Sharon is on the Toronto Conference Executive, and she worships at Kingston Road United Church. Next, we have Michael Blair. Michael is the General Counsel representative to this conference meeting, and he serves in the General Counsel office as Executive Minister of the Church and Mission Unit. He's also, I understand, a voluntary associate minister at Bloor Street. You can read more about Michael, too, because in the documentation it tells more about his background. And Neil Parker is a member of the Order of Ministry, serves as a military chaplain in the Canadian Armed Forces with the rank of Major. So we welcome you three, and we look forward to what you have to share with us.
I like to stand in the pulpit or a place of leadership because in many of our churches that's not possible for me. I'd like to start by expressing gratitude to Affirm United and the Affirming study group within our conference for understanding that any marginalization is too much and for inviting me to speak today. I'm a person living with physical disability who is active in the conference. I'm a GC 42 commissioner and served on the sessional committee, chair of council of Kingston Road United Church, a member at large on Toronto Southeast Presbytery executive, and also currently serving on the executive of Toronto Conference. I did not always have a disability. I was diagnosed with primary progressive multiple sclerosis in 1998. At the time, I was able-bodied, a wife and mother, and held a management position in a major computer consulting company. I left work, a work that I loved. I found it challenging and engrossing to look after my health. There was heavy fatigue, several falls, and over the next few years, my mobility declined. I became worried about safety, and I was surprised and frustrated when I was excluded from activities, especially in the church. My able-bodied privilege was eroded by exclusion due to barriers in the built environment and the apparent assumption by some that I was not capable of decision-making or even speaking for myself. As I changed, my relationship to my church changed too. My husband and I eventually left our longtime congregation, in large part due to experiences related to my disability. But faith and community are important to me. We eventually found our way back to the church in a different congregation. My involvement in various courts of the church in the past 5 years coincides with improved health. I am a person of faith, and I ponder if my improving health allows my church work, or if my church work, with all its frustrations, is contributing to my improving health. In any case, the experience of the various parts of the church has been a blessing, but not without difficulties, some of which have pushed me to my limits, questioning again what I am doing here. We as a church have work to do. I am supportive of our conference becoming an affirming conference and offer the following 3 requests for us as a community. I ask that we create an online inventory of the physical accessibility of United Church buildings within the conference, that we pursue and promote a culture of inclusion, and that we review conference processes and procedures with the intention of increasing accessibility. Why is creating an online inventory of physical accessibility of all our buildings at the top of my list? It is personal. It's also about enabling persons with physical disabilities to find a church they can attend, and even more, find a church where they will be welcome not only to worship, but to bring their children, to easily join the group for coffee, and if we are lucky, share their gifts and talents through volunteering. As a member of the conference, I want to be confident that conference events and meetings will be held in accessible locations. While it's important to state this, I am aware that this is largely already happening. I've come to rely on the fact that people are caring for me. I don't worry or call ahead for conference events. I know I'll be able to get access, participate, and have something to eat. For this, I am very grateful. But I'm a member of the executive of both presbytery and conference. I should be expected to attend covenanting services or celebrations in other locations. My first question always has to be, can I get in? Followed by, will there be a washroom? And can I join the group for worship in meetings or over coffee? At present, there is no easy way to access the information, short of calling the specific church to check. This came into focus to me when I was in Corner Brook for GC 42. The sessional committee met 3 days in advance of conference, and we were hosted by the churches of Corner Brook. Two of the three churches in Corner Brook were not accessible to me. So I was welcome to work with them, but unable to eat with them. This inventory that I'm talking about is important. Please know that such an inventory is not meant to be judgmental. It's not a blaming game. I understand that physical accessibility often costs money, time, and most inconveniently, ongoing maintenance. But inclusion can give us some unexpected benefits, like my volunteering, or the volunteering of a friend named Tracy, a lay person who uses a power wheelchair. In the last couple of years, she has directed productions of Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell, raising funds and building community at her local Toronto congregation. She's very talented, and we are lucky to have her. My second request is that we do what we can to create a culture of inclusion within the conference. Persons with disabilities are a varied group. An incomplete list would include many with hearing or visual impairments, various mobility challenges, mental illness, and/or chronic illness. But I'm no expert on the ways of including all persons with disabilities. It will be wise, I think, to work with other groups, perhaps other Affirming conferences, general council staff, our church partners, or a group I've just been invited to join. I have an opportunity to join the advisory group for a program called Our Doors Are Open, which is led by OCAD University and funded by the Government of Ontario. The project's full name is Our Doors Are Open, an interfaith welcome to people with disabilities. For many, participation in faith-based activities is important for a full life, and the questions we are addressing about inclusion are shared by many faiths. The Our Doors Are Open project will build resources to support creation of a culture of inclusion, welcoming persons of all ages and disabilities in communities of faith. In both urban centers and rural communities, places of worship act as an important community meeting place for outreach, cultural, social, and faith-based activities. We are sometimes social community hubs. When we aren't inclusive or accessible, persons with disabilities are missing more than our Sunday worship. In its initial stages, the Our Doors Are Open project hopes to work with up to 300 places of worship of different faiths across Ontario. It would be my hope that Toronto Conference can be well represented in this project group. The third item on my list for Toronto Conference is a review of processes and procedures. It's important, the details of the management of our real estate and booking meetings. Many of our buildings are not completely accessible. For instance, my own church has a second floor I've never seen. Simply moving a meeting from one space to another, like the second floor of Kingston Road or an inaccessible basement, can exclude people with mobility problems. I follow a restricted diet. Many times, my congregation has lunch after church, and for years I have known that did not include me. When we rent space in our buildings, do the renters have access to the elevator keys if the elevator is needed for access to the space that they're renting? If not, they may find themselves turning people away on cold, wet evenings, as I have been. If a meeting ends early, will your staff expect to wait until the wheel-trans or other ride arrives for the person with disabilities? Or will they ask that person, as I have been asked, to wait outside on a cold winter night in hopes that the staff and minister can lock up and go home. I could go on, and my husband tells I could go on and on, but I think you get the idea. Inclusion goes to the very depth of how we operate. One last comment, we need also to review our grants and financial processes with accessibility in mind. Currently, accessibility improvements are excluded from qualifying for PTCC grants. Yes, in this very rich conference, what I and others like me might need to get into our buildings, to fully participate, to reach a pulpit, is specifically not funded. Quite a message. We have money, but not for you. I'm also aware that restrictions on these PTCC grants are presently under review and hope that at least this constraint is removed. As we learn more about the action of inclusion, I suspect more process changes will be recognized. We are only just beginning. So in conclusion, I'm supportive of our conference becoming Affirming. Look for an online inventory of church building physical accessibility. We want to actively work towards a culture of inclusion for all persons, including those with disabilities, and a conference which conducts ongoing review of its processes and procedures to ensure we live inclusion.
In 2006, the General Council, meeting in Thunder Bay, committed the United Church of Canada to becoming an intercultural church. At the time that decision was made, the assumption was that interculturalism was only about ethnic inclusion, and that interculturalism meant creating a space for people who look like me and others who were racialized. For the most part, many of our communities didn't understand that the invitation and the gift and the call to become an intercultural church was a call and a gift to the entire United Church of Canada. We have gotten a little bit better, but still not far enough. And so I want to share from this evening from the perspective of the intercultural lens and some of our learnings that we have gathered over the years. The first thing is that I want to contest the notion of inclusion. When we talk about the intercultural church, we talk about it as a space where power and privilege is attended to, and that we can recognize how power and privilege work. The language of inclusion is a language of power, because the question is who chooses who is included and who is excluded. So, as a black man, a man of color who is a part of this church, and as also a gay man, I find myself at times in spaces where I'm accepted around my sexual identity, but I'm not as comfortably accepted around my skin color. And it's not always an easy place because in some ways we make choices about who we include, how we include, what we include, and what we exclude. And it's very subtle. I'll use my own congregation as an example. I love being in my congregation during Black History Month. It's an amazing time. We have one of the most amazing organists in the city. And the stops get pulled out for Black History Month. Our congregation haven't quite figured out how to dance. And it's a painful experience to watch. So in Black History Month, I feel at home. March comes, April comes, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, January, and I hear none of my sights, hear none of my sounds or my sights. And I, in terms of my experience as a Caribbean person, as a person of color, I don't feel or hear or see a sense of belonging. So it's important for us to recognize that the invitation to us is an invitation to welcome folks, not to include folks. And that's a subtle difference in terms of how we welcome inclusion. The second thing for me is difference matters. Someone said recently that heaven is found in the margins because in the margins, difference matter, and in the margin, because difference matter, I matter. We heard this morning about the notion of creating spaces of integrity and spaces where people can fully become themselves. And in the perspective of difference, I'm allowed, not even allowed, but I know it's safe to be myself. And part of that is also understanding, and recently I was in a context, I was preaching around Black History Month, and I remember pausing and saying to the congregation, I'm not an angry black man. And someone after the sermon asked me, how do you feel having to pause and to acknowledge that you're not an angry black man? And we talked about that and recognized that that's a tough place to be because the experience of what it means to live in this body of mine with this skin tone requires me from time to time to suffer in ways that people don't understand. And so I sometimes get pretty angry at what I experience and what others experience. And I remember being in a conversation recently talking about white privilege. And someone said, we shouldn't be talking about white privilege because it makes me feel guilty. And my response was, I don't care about your guilt because my kids, when they go out on the street at night, are experiencing issues that your guilt can't solve. And to be able to speak out of whether it's my identity as a black man, my identity as a gay man, my identity as someone who was formed in a Pentecostal tradition, and Baptist to boot, to be able to be in a place where I know I'm accepted for who I am. I'm not just tolerated, because in the place of welcome, difference matters. It's interesting to me that the book of Revelation ends with peoples and tribes from every nation under the earth gathering together. And you have that sense in that chapter of Revelation that difference matter. Everybody comes together in the fullness of who they are, celebrating and worshiping God. And that's my longing for us as a community of churches. And as we are about the work of interculturalism, is to help us reframe the notion of inclusion, but also to remind us over and over again that difference matters. You rob me, and we rob each other when we insist that we must all be alike and we cannot appreciate and celebrate the difference of who we are. The third thing I want to say is this, that the gift of interculturalism and the gift of welcome is an invitation to transformation. I'm convinced, and the older I get, probably the more convinced I become, that we talk the language of transformation, we talk the language of change, but we're not really interested or invested in changing. We're comfortable with the way we are and what we do. And the gift of being an intercultural community is a gift of transformation, because we say that in an intercultural space, everyone is changed. No one remains the way they are. That's scary stuff. Honestly, I don't want to be like you. I don't. But part of us being in relationship with each other is that we are changed. Our boundaries are enlarged. You think of the story of Jesus and the woman, the Syrophoenician woman. And we know in some cases we're told that in that experience, Jesus shifts his understanding of his ministry, because the woman said, "You call me a dog? Very well. I may very well be a dog. But even the dogs get to lick the crumbs from under the table." And we know and we hear in that story, something changes in Jesus and Jesus' ministry. Our ability to be together, to be communities of welcome, not communities of inclusion, but communities of welcome. Communities where differences are celebrated, and where, in the celebration of our differences, we move to be transformed, to nudge a little bit closer to the kingdom of heaven here on earth. As you deliberate, may the vision of God's kingdom transform us.
May God grant that I speak with wisdom and have thoughts worthy of that which I have received, for God is the God even of wisdom, and all of our thoughts and our words are in God's hands. Amen. Jody, you're watching time. Give me 90 seconds when you want me to stop. Because, Sharon, you claimed that you could keep going on and on, but they put me last. And I can't even see if it's going to get dark, so I've got no time references right now. I am feeling awkward. I'm feeling awkward because I have been asked to speak for others. And that is somewhat uncomfortable. It's not my story that I've been asked to tell. And one of the ways of dealing with that awkwardness is to shift responsibility. And I blame Audrey, who asked me to speak here. What I am asking us to think about is how we as a church and bodies of church people include those who are struggling with mental illness. Now, I work as a military chaplain, which means that I do have a particular heart for those that are struggling with particular types of mental illness that are caused by trauma and stress. But it also means that I work in a daily culture where we talk about suicide, where we talk about mental resilience, where we talk about mental health and how we strengthen one another, how we live together as a community of men and women who will identify, strengthen, and support one another as we try to keep ourselves mentally fit and strong and flexible and resilient. And that community is not the church. That community is the armed forces where I work. And I struggle sometimes when I look at the ways in which we do church that do not always affirm and recognize and pay attention to the mental stresses that many of us are under. Now, I read again, and I commend to you again, the reading of Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. It's 1951. But it is the story of a man who is slowly succumbing to the stress of mental illness. And it follows his family as they attempt to support and try to understand and ultimately cannot help him. It ends with him committing vehicular suicide as he crashes his car because only the insurance money makes sense to him. And the refrain throughout that play is attention must be paid. Attention must be paid. So I ask us to pay attention to the place of mental health and mental illness within our communities, our society, and within our church communities. You may know and you may not know that 20% of Canadians will experience a debilitating mental illness at some point during their lives. Some say as many as 40%. Or that half of us will experience a severe mental illness before the age of 40. The numbers vary. I'll stick with the lowest. 20% of us will face a period of debilitating mental illness. The group in which that percentage is increasing at the fastest rate, over 65. As that age group grows and extends itself, incidences of stress illnesses, stress injuries, mental health deficiencies grows. Now, without a show of hands, how many of you have a significant percentage of people in your congregation over the age of 65? Don't raise your hands. That is the group that is experiencing more and more mental health stress. And the other group, and it is the group that I work with day by day, are those between the ages of 15 and 24. The average stress levels for a high school student today are the same as those for a psychiatric patient in the 1950s. Your average high school student experiences the same stress that would hospitalize you in 1950. The second leading cause of death for people in that age group is suicide. The first is accident. That should frighten us. If attention is to be paid to that type of reality, how do we pay attention? I would say one of the first things we need to do is, as we have so often had to do in our church, we pay attention to our ways of seeing and our ways of speaking. I, myself, have said on far too many occasions, I am going crazy. Now, my wife, who suffered for 35 years from a bipolar affective disorder cannot glibly say, I am going crazy. That is far too close to her heart, and it is far too easy for me and for many of us to simply say, oh, this drives me crazy. I suggest we stop saying that. Because to say that makes light of the realities of many people, and many people within our congregations and in our circles. The first way to pay attention is to pay attention to our language and the ways in which we view and are open to or uncomfortable with people's experiences of mental stress. A 2008 survey of Canadians points out that just about 50% of us would tell friends or co-workers that they have a mental illness. Half of us would not tell anybody that we were injured. 42% of Canadians, 42% of us, were unsure whether they would socialize with a friend who has a mental illness. 55% say that they would not marry somebody with a mental illness. 46% of Canadians think people use the term mental illness as an excuse for bad behavior. And 27% said that they would be fearful to be around somebody who has a mental illness. Now, maybe those percentages don't include any of us, but in my heart of hearts, I suspect that we are average. And so the first way to pay attention is to pay attention to the ways in which we can dismiss and stigmatize people who suffer the whole range of mental stress, injuries, and mental illnesses. Be careful of the language. Be careful of the ways in which we put people into that box. I do believe that the church ought to be about advocacy for mental health. I do believe that we should be taking it seriously, that we should be speaking on behalf of mental health facilities, mental health care, that we should be modeling it within our church. But ahead of advocacy, because we're the United Church, we advocate for everything and for everybody. We often lose ourselves in that type of caring for all. I think first we need to give agency to those who are dealing with their own mental health and their mental health challenges. Agency means being that type of inclusive church that allows people and encourages people to care for their own mental well-being. Now, I have a niece who suffers from an anxiety disorder. If you don't know what that feels like, imagine that your chair is tipping backwards, just about to fall, and that it feels like that all day and tomorrow. That is what it is like for her. When she attends church, she needs to take care of her mental well-being. When the people that I work with who are suffering from post-traumatic stress attend our congregations, they are aware of things that trigger them, that make them anxious, that make them uncomfortable and not want to be there, and they often need encouragement to do the things that they can do to help keep themselves well. Quite simply, for me, when I came back from Bosnia, one of the realities of serving in that war zone was that mines had been dropped from airplanes. And so the roads had been tested and checked and were mine-free. Nothing else was. And a green field, a grassy field, we could assume was covered with mines. So you can imagine what it was like for me after 7 months there to return home to the beautiful park near my house in Burnaby and to watch children running across the grass. I died. And that lasted for 6 months. And even now when I say that, it comes back. And that is not suffering. That is so minor compared to the suffering of many of the people who work beside me and who worship with me. And when we are being triggered by simple things like that, when we need to do things to help take care of ourselves, that is where the church can give agency and encouragement. I have many friends who, when they enter a room, are never going to sit at this table, aside from the fact that it says staff, are not going to sit at this table, because they simply need to keep their backs to a wall and close to an entrance. That's a learned behavior, and that is how they manage their anxiety. And glory be if they come into my church and I in the pulpit say, "Hey, you sitting in the back, why don't you all come to the front?" It's not a gift. Nor is it a gift for some of them who are dealing with obsessive-compulsive disorders or anxieties to be told, "Everybody just stand up and greet your neighbor and tell them something about yourself." When people say, "I need to take care of myself," we can give them agency and respect and understanding, and not judge them for an inadequate theology or a poor understanding of church, or tell them that nobody is welcome in this church if they don't like children, because they may find it difficult to deal with the chaos of having multi-generations in one place at one time. Crying, even in a little child who has the right to cry, may trigger those around us who need to be taking care of their mental health. I'm all for crying rooms in the church. I would never put a baby there, but there are times, my brothers and sisters, when I would like to go to worship, when the music is going to move me, when the preacher is going to touch my heart, when the prayers are going to go deep, and I would love to be able to go into a crying room. May it be so. All I can ask is that attention be paid. We are all struggling to keep ourselves sane in this crazy world. Sometimes we know what we can do, many times we do not. But we can be open and encouraging of one another and help to create safe and open spaces. And maybe some of the people that we do not see, those who are helpless and hopeless and lost, as we heard in the welcome from Whitehorse United, may find a place with us again. May it be so.